A player West Ham could look to sign this January transfer window is Enzo Le Fee of Lorient in the Ligue 1. And there are some really interesting attributes to this player. If you're not familiar with him, there have been comparisons to the likes of McAllister of Brighton, which we'll get onto very shortly. But overall, it looks like a move could possibly be done if we're interested. It looks like he's at that kind of club that we could lure away. And yeah, without further ado, let's take a look at him as a player. Mike, I'll let you lead on this one. Just tell us a bit more about him and what he could bring to West Ham if we do try and bring him this January.
Yeah. So once I've finished, you will have a very infused sloth because it's a player he loves. But, he's only 22. Lorient came up to Ligue 1 a couple of seasons back. And even at that point in Ligue 2, he was one of those standout players for them. And since their promotion, he's gone from strength to strength. And he's played in a variety of roles, but he's really, over the last kind of 18 months, really kind of cemented his place as more of a centre midfielder who can play in an advanced role. But what he's very good at is essentially taking the ball in tight spaces under pressure and to absorb that pressure and to play out from it. We've put a thread out on our Twitter account, which kind of shows some highlights of him against Auxerre and Paris Saint-Germain. And what you can see within that is, again, how he is willing and essentially taking that responsibility to accept the ball under pressure, under a good press, and then to trust his own ability in which to ride the challenge, to roll them, to actually then drive with the ball. He also has, again, that intelligence to understand as to when you inject pace into play, whether that be by a quick 1-2 or just by, again, smart pieces of movement and then bursting through with his pace. Again, we've got a couple of clips within that thread as well, which kind of showed that. But again, it's another good, high-quality set-piece taker. They're often quite flat and quite full of pace, which if you're kind of looking to kind of compare, a bit like how Snodgrass used to deliver in that flatness and that pace on which he used to ping the ball in, which was very much revered during his time. But his vision is incredible. He will make very good slide rule passes. Again, the sense of defense is in the opposite direction. His ability on the ball in which to shift between feet very quickly is incredible. Again, as I say, it helps him in those tight spaces and to operate in those tight spaces because he's able to shift the ball to draw a foul or to essentially beat the opposition. And now, is incredibly good when you look at all of those kind of attacking areas and the in possession. And whilst he statistically doesn't look amazing defensively, he is another workhorse. He will work tirelessly. Against PSG in particular, recommend trying to watch the highlights for that one. He is constantly trying to break down a PSG, trying to cut off passing lanes, to intercept and to essentially help his team before then being the player that helps him in transition. And that's where he really kind of does well, in that he's able to orchestrate and dictate play. And as we said, very much like McAllister at Brighton, he's at times unassuming in his play, but you give him the ball, it doesn't matter whether he's got time or not, he can do something with it. And his intelligence off the ball often means he can get in some really good, promising positions because he will, as a term that I like, he kind of ghosts into positions because he just perpetually moves. A bit like, obviously not to the same standard, but how, say, Messi, how when he just walks around the pitch, it's understanding of when you run, when you walk, where you maybe kind of actual jog. It's having that calmness to know that not everything has to be 100 miles an hour and constantly frenetic. It can just be there's moments of stillness that he utilizes in which to gain an advantage.
So what do you think? Because if, say, I know at the moment we're playing that back five, but I'm assuming at some point in the future we will play a midfield three again, with either Rice, Paqueta, Fornals, or Rice, Downs, Paqueta. If it was to be, for example, Rice, Paqueta, and Le Fee, do you think that would blend quite nicely? Do you think he would mold nicely to how we would want to play with those in midfield?
I think it's a really, really good blend. You mentioned the way with which he hits a pass, it's that sort of Snodgrass zip he gets onto it. And that really does sum it up. If you can picture that from particularly his Hull days with Snodgrass, where he could just hit a ball and it would glide across the turf. He's got such a great eye for a pass that when you think about the average size of the player in Ligue 1 and the type of player they are as well, generally it's very physical. It's a very quick league. It's probably the closest in terms of physicality to the Premier League, I'd say, it's particularly with its intensity. And this is a 5'7" player who just rides the challenges, gets stuck in, and is able to offer you perpetual motion. He just carries on. And as Mike said, he does have a bit of that messy style to his movement, but also in the way that he moves the ball. It's that same zip across the turf when he plays a pass into someone. And look, we're not comparing him to someone who is, in my opinion, the greatest of all time, but
Snodgrass.
Yeah. Obviously, goes without saying. But Lorient are very much my team in the French league, and I love watching them play because this year, but particularly at the start of the year, they massively overperformed. They've got some great players. They've got Otanga, they got Moffey, and a couple of years ago they sold Johan Visser to Brentford, and he came over. Obviously, he's the bane of West Ham's existence, but these players adapt quickly to the Premier League. Lorient are very much a counter-attacking side, but they move the ball really quickly. And this season, they've tried to adapt how they play from that sort of counter-attacking style to using their outlets with pace. And Le Fee is very much one of those. He doesn't look like it, but he zips about the pitch and he's able to find that pass. He's able to play in their forwards like Otanga and Moffey just to find them the extra yard for a shot. And when we talk about that three, he very much offers kind of what Fornals does. He's a little bit more athletic, but it's that same sort of work rate as well. He gets stuck in.
And as well, over the likes of Fornals, he will offer more pace, which is one of the things that we often say is Fornals has pace. What a player he would be, but then likely would be asked if he had pace.
And that's exactly it. He is someone whose game is really complete, and the fact that he's at Lorient, and that as I said, they started the season really well. They were up in the top four for quite a while, and the past few games they've really fallen off. I don't think the World Cup break will help them. I think they'll struggle to really find their feet. They didn't have many players who went away, and I think that gap is going to slightly hinder them. But also, Lorient's financial situation is such that I think if we put in a decent bid, he's the sort of player we can easily attain.
I guess that leads kind of nicely on to the likelihood of us being able to sign him in January, because I know you mentioned their slot. Lorient have dropped off a little bit, but they're still in contention for that top four. They're only a few points off third. So is this really a signing that's realistic for us this January? I know you mentioned the financial difficulties of the club, but when a club is so close to top four, losing one of their most, imperative players on their team isn't something they'll probably want to do cheaply. So do we have the funds to do this move?
Well, I think that they're currently sitting seventh. And as you said, it is incredibly tight at the top of Ligue 1. But if we look to move players on like we are rumoured to, we have the Vlasic money covered coming in, which, we've already said we could use in different deals. We could potentially look to shift the likes of Lanzini, who aren't featuring. And I think that for a decent sum, maybe around £20 million, we could get this done. However, I do think there's a lot of wiggle room in there. I do think that if you submitted a £15 million bid, I think they'd struggle to turn it down. They may well do if they picked up a win the weekend before and they suddenly are shooting up that table because act. But I think the hierarchy would potentially overrule. And it's no disrespect to Lorient. As I said, they're very much my team in France. I love watching them play, but he would very much suit the way West Ham play as well. He's got that eye for a pass to hit on the counter, but also to carry it forward as well.
I just want to ask you guys this. Another midfielder we've already mentioned as a potential target this January is Unai. Who would you guys prefer out of the two, out of Le Fee and Unai, if you could pick one for this January?
I think I know who Slough will go for, but I would go for Le Fee. I think he brings that pace, but he's a more all-round type player in my view. I think many people have often lauded how Lanzini plays in our midfield. I've never been massively convinced as a midfielder as such, as a centre midfielder. But I think Le Fee offers much of what Lanzini does, but also is far more of a threat in that he is less passive in his types of passing. He wants to be more direct and be a bit more vertical with his passing, shall we say. And on top of that, I think also when you look at the cost of the deal, with having 18 months left in his contract. So again, come next year, teams will be looking around because all of a sudden he's in his last year. We'll either wait and do a pre-contract. And I think he would wait because I think he knows full well he can go to a bigger team. No disrespect to Lorient. And also the next two games, they can see them drop down the league because they got Monaco and Marseille. So again, their league position at the moment could change in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But also it's the fact that we are lacking a player who can link play, who can absorb pressure and to also take the burden off the likes of Paqueta for being, a creative foil and outlet. And he also allows that point of you can then alternate and rotate between him and Paqueta who is the advanced player. Also, he's very adept in moving across the pitch, set piece. Again, it's a player that I would personally take. And I think, as we say, it's the comparisons to McAllister are not a kind of a flippant thing that's been thrown around. It's not something that people have said lightly. It's because 2 years his junior, he could develop into the player that McAllister is now, who's now drawing attention from the bigger clubs and now about 40, 50 million pounds potentially. So buying a player that cost you, even if he cost you 20 million pounds, which I think would be a position that Lorient wouldn't go to and would struggle to push because of his contract length.
Yeah.
Worth that, by the mind. He is worth that. And then some more. But because of the league kind of issues around finances, because of the contract length he's on, I do feel that you could strike a deal and he would be worth, if he continues in the form that he's in, easily double what he is within a season. And then after 2 to 3 seasons, that again can exponentially grow. He is diminutive. He's maybe not what people would consider a Moyes signing, but we have to remember the love affair he had with Lanzini for a while. And it is a player that offers him a long-term Lanzini type player who can play as an 8. And if we are brave to go into a 4-3-3, he could be a good complement for the remainder of the season, because obviously Rice will likely go, but could be a very good complementing player to Paqueta and Rice, and to allow us to be calmer in possession, more composed in possession, which means that we are potentially able to draw players or teams out of lower and medium-term blocks. And also his passing ability to find those players and to make those slide rule passes, because he sends the defence in one way and passes the other, is only going to improve, which I think is something over Anucci, who is an incredible player. But I think from my perspective, if we want to be more possession-based, I think that's the player you would move for.
Cool. Well, it's going to be interesting. Like you mentioned, we'll keep an eye on Lorient's next couple games, as that could be a determining factor whether they're more likely to sell him. And yeah, let us know in the comments who you would prefer out of Le Fee and Unai if you could pick one. both different players, both would bring something to the table in their different rights. So yeah, I guess that's another one to keep an eye on for this January. And it'll be interesting to see how moves develop over the course of this transfer window. Leave a like on the video if you did enjoy. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well, as we'll be posting regular content throughout the year. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.